Well, we're going to go from the startup stage with small companies to talk about a very large company. And the person who would be sitting next to me is Francesco Starace, the CEO of Enel. He, until about 2 weeks ago, was planning to be here in person. He unfortunately had a bicycle accident and is on crutches and not able to travel. But he has agreed to be with us by video. So he's going to join us on the screen in a minute live for a conversation that we'll have, and then we'll open it up to the audience as well. Let me just say a word about Enel, because I'm sure many of you are not familiar with this company. Enel is the Italian electric utility company, originally a state-owned company that has since expanded, gone public, and now operates in 35 countries. It is about an $80 billion a year company employing 70,000 people. And 43% of its energy generating capacity is from renewables. I just think about the scale of an $80 billion company, 43% from renewables. And Francesco Starace has committed that the company will move to 100% renewables and has a fascinating vision for how that's going to come about. So I'm hoping Mr. Starace will appear any minute on the screen in front of us. And there he is. Good morning or good evening, Mr. Starace.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us. Just to introduce Mr. Starace, he actually is a nuclear engineer. His degree from Polytechnic University in Milan. He worked for a number of leading companies, GE, ABB. In 2000, he joined Enel. And in 2008, became the head of a separate company that Enel spun off called Enel Green Power. In 2014, Enel Green Power was re-merged with the Enel Group, and Mr. Starace became the CEO. And Mr. Starace, we've mentioned that Enel is committed to going to 100% renewables, and that takes a lot of innovation. And you've said that at Enel, sustainability is what drives innovation, not the other way around. And I'm curious to know, what do you mean by that? And how has that influenced the way innovation happens at Enel?
Well, maybe, first of all, thank you for setting up this telecommunication that seems to work pretty well. I hope it stands still until the end of the period we're supposed to be communicating, and allow me to participate even if I am, like you said, on crutches. Look, I mean, basically what I wanted to mean with that statement is that, you know, in companies like Enel or most of utilities worldwide, I think this should apply also to most of the sector here, the word innovation is largely unknown and remains really a minor part of the activity. There is a relative low innovation content in an electrical utility worldwide. Our business has not required a lot of innovation for so long that we are not used to innovate that much. So that is one observation. The other one observation is that you look around and you see that there are still billions of people, that 1.5 billion, 1.2 billion, depends on what you really consider the parameter, that have limited or no access at all to energy, to electricity, that require a complete different approach and a complete different view if we want to bring them into our, let's say, customer base, if you want to say, or if you want to give them what we give for granted every day when we are here. Can we do that by trying harder with the same approach we have continued to apply over the past decades? We don't think so. We think it has proven not effective and totally unsatisfactory. So we said we need to change that approach. That means we need to innovate. So we need to push the sustainability issues into the innovation domain in order for innovation to really have the right drive in our industry. That said, you can say that we can continue to do our own business the way we were used to do, and probably nothing would happen in the next 5 years to us. We would probably be fine. But if we want to go and look beyond that, we should change now immediately and say, guys, we need to find a completely different way of doing things because we want to grow in a sustainable way and we want to address the key sustainability issues we're facing in an innovative way. So in that sense, sustainability is needed because without it, innovation doesn't fly in a utility.
Terrific, thank you. And the way you've approached innovation at Enel with something you call open innovation is really quite different from the way we've seen other companies do it. Could you describe what that is and how that operates at Enel?
It always begins from the first observation. Are we capable to innovate ourselves? No. So we need somebody else to innovate for us. Now, how do we get these guys outside to innovate for us? There are many ways. I think we tried and failed in most of them. Can we buy them? We did that too. We bought some innovation startups. And the moment we bought them, we killed them because we brought them in an environment that was unable to keep them alive. Can we try and teach them what we know so that they get better and get ideas? Even worse, it doesn't work at all. So we decided that we would go in places where innovation seems to be more frequently available. And there are places in the world this is happening faster and in a more concentrated way than others. One, of course, is Silicon Valley, another one is Israel, and there are other areas where you can see this happening. We go in these places, we establish a small hub, and what we bring there is a list of problems that we cannot solve, a list of issues we would like to address in a different way, and let these people address those ideas, those problems with their mind. We decided not to invest because also in this case we failed. We have partnerships with investment funds that are used to invest in startups, and we use them as investment vehicles. What we do is if we find things that make sense to us, we accelerate their deployment on the market using our world-large scale. We don't want to have exclusivity to these products and ideas because we think that even if we are large, we're not large enough for them to really become widely available and cheap enough. And we go to the next one and keep doing this all over again. With no limitation of segment of the industry, so generation, distribution, transmission, market, with no limitation of geography, everywhere this is possible. And we found that this is an incredible potential for multiplying the opportunities of innovation. Surprisingly, we found out that this is also stimulating innovation in the company, which we didn't think we had.
That's wonderful. What an extraordinary story. And I understand actually not only do you have these hubs, but you have a website where anyone in the world can propose solutions to some of the problems you're trying to solve. And within 30 days, they will be evaluated by your team and get a response.
Yes, we have that site. We also had another interesting experience, which we called My Best Failure, where we tried to, basically this was like a competition for who failed the most within the company. So we had people expressing what failures they thought were the worst ones, and the worst of the worst won. I came sixth. I didn't win, but I was in the first 10 at least, you know. And that, you know, I think you need to push this failure mentality into the company if you want to have some innovation pick up. Otherwise, if you think you will never going to fail, you will never innovate anyway.
You've created this remarkable vision of moving to 100% renewables. And of course, when you depend on wind and solar, they are unreliable, they're intermittent. And so the storage technology to really store the electricity needed for a major city like Rome or Milan or elsewhere in the world really has not yet been developed. So what is the solution you've come up with for how to balance the grid in a world where all power is from renewables?
Look, I remember about 15 years ago, when there was a study made by a network operator in Europe, which I will not tell you who it was, that said when renewables, remember 15 years ago, renewables were just at the very beginning in Europe. When renewable penetration will get to 5% in this grid will become so unstable that we will have problems in managing it. And this same operator has changed that threshold over the years. And we have now clear evidence that, let's say, a mature, mid-sized country can take up to 30-35% of renewable, intermittent renewables, managing the rest of the portfolio of generation in a way that this can be managed. Then if you want to go above this threshold, or you are in particular isolated situation, of course you need some kind of storage. And storage in any case would be needed to go forward into 100% renewables, or say above 50 or 60% for prolonged amount of period of time. We think that, you know, we have, storage is not new. There is a lot of storage, energy storage ideas and methodologies. Pump storage is widely available since about a century and stuff like that. But today, batteries seem to be solving the big issue that is having storage everywhere, regardless of what Mother Nature has given you in terms of mountain distribution, waterfalls, and stuff like that. With batteries, with good, available, cheap batteries, storing the electricity would be available, and it would be possible all over the world easily. Are we going to get there? We think yes. The outlook that we have in the next 3-4 years seems to point that batteries are going to improve their performances and reduce their costs to a point that different level of functionalities in energy storage will become available to electrical systems at a reasonable competitive cost. After 3 years, it's a fog. I think this is a technology that needs to evolve with a 3 years cycle. And I think the first 3 years that we observe from now to 3 years forward is a very good, clear picture that, yes, we're going to get there. Now, if we have batteries that are competitive and can be fitted in a distribution network in order to cover for intermittent generation of energy at medium voltage, high voltage, or low voltage size, don't forget distributed generation, that can only work properly if we fully digitize the distribution and transmission grids. If we fail to do that, then we lose many of the benefits that an economic battery system could give us. So the two things go hand in hand. You need to push batteries, and that's happening. You need to digitize the distribution networks to get ready for when batteries are going to be available.
And I understand you actually are thinking about the batteries in electric cars as being sufficient, once you get to a certain number of electric cars, to store the electricity that's needed to balance the grid for a major city. And so with this digitized grid that you've mentioned, you're actually creating, and I believe you actually have a prototype in Denmark, where when people plug in their car, they not only can charge their car, but the grid can access the car's battery to balance the grid, and that this provides enough revenue to Enel that Enel is actually thinking about creating what they call electromobility, a company that will actually basically lease or provide electric cars to people, because the benefit of you being able to access their batteries is enough for you to subsidize the cost of them having access to an electric car. Could you describe that?
Yeah, I think, if we look at what we do with our car, we basically drive it more or less 1,000, 1,200 hours a year, and all the rest of the time our car is basically waiting for us to go and pick it up. And it's rusting away, let's face it. So if we consider that an electric car is basically a large battery on wheels, that can be used when it's not being driven, then all of a sudden a large part of the year availability opens up to you. So you say, for those 7,000 hours that the car is not being driven, what can I do with this battery? And if the battery is connected to a digital network that can access the battery for micro adjustments, we're not talking about charging and discharging. We're talking about really minor fluctuation of the grids that can be compensated instantaneously by millions of cars distributed in the grid itself. This is a real good potential for value creation, because the real-time modulation of a grid is the most expensive value part of the value chain. So we're talking about the top layer of the cake available to millions of car users while they're not driving their cars. So if you are the owner of a car today, of those cars that we have in Denmark at this moment, while you're not driving your car, this car is making money for you by modulating the Danish grid together with us providing the connection to the grid. We share this benefit, and the owner of the car at the end of the day has earned some money because his car is balancing the grid while he's not using it. That can happen in many other cases. It can happen also in batteries at home or elsewhere. But clearly, millions of cars are millions of batteries. And don't forget, most of the times our cars are not cars, are just sitting there waiting for us.
Yeah. And it's just such a fascinating vision, because the more you can subsidize the cost of getting an electric car, the faster they will proliferate, and the faster they proliferate, the quicker you can move to renewable energy and have this means of balancing the grid. Well, we've got a number of questions coming in from the audience. Let me just do two things. First, I want to connect the electromobility back to this open innovation, because my understanding is that in order to make this connection to the grid possible, you actually needed a certain software or technology, and that there was a small spin-off that identified it. If you could just comment on that.
Yeah, we found, first of all, we found out that some guys in Endesa, some Spaniards in our company, had the idea of this charging and discharging methodology. And we also found out that a Japanese manufacturer, a major Japanese manufacturer, had the same idea. Then we needed to have some kind of software that was able to make these two things, the meter and the car, talk together with the rest of the grid. And we found an interesting startup in the US that is today working with us in this, and that put the two things together and provided a platform where this exchange is possible.
And I understand.
It was pretty interesting mix.
Yes. And the startup, I think, had no business at the time, was a spin-off of a University of Delaware research
Correct.
project, something
Correct.
that quite out of the ordinary course.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's one of those combinations that you find more frequently than you would imagine if you just give up the control that you think you can have on these things.
Good. Well, we have a number of questions coming in from the audience. One of them is, what advice would you give to company leaders of other industries that are slow to evolve? And I'm going to connect that with a separate question, which is to say, in the US, there is resistance to developing the energy infrastructure that's needed for cleaner, renewable energy. And how do you move that industry forward?
I think there is a toxin or some kind of, let's say, a problem that we all have in the industry that is called legacy. Legacy is always used in a positive sense. The legacy of our ancestors, the legacy of our culture, the legacy of our civilization. But legacy is also something that ties you to ways of thinking. And these companies have a lot of assets. We sit on billions of physical assets. This is our legacy. We call them legacy assets. Legacy assets they are like a drug. You can never get off them until you make an effort. Because from an accounting standpoint, they sit on your book. Your temptation is to squeeze out another year of even smaller chunks of value, but it basically comes from free. You have them already in the books. So if you keep this legacy with you and don't separate your mind from it, you cannot change anything, really. You think you can because you try and try, but the legacy brings back the whole company again and again and again. So my advice is separate the legacy from the real world you're going to face in the future. And all of a sudden, your mind is very clear. You start acting as if you were a clean sheet of paper company, and freedom of thinking comes to you. So I think that's the advice, the most basic advice I can give. The rest is basically not that difficult. The difficult thing is getting off the legacy trap. And I think part of it has to do also with this legacy thing, explains also some of the resistance of the infrastructure delay in some parts of the world, including the US, because your temptation is to say, I put all this money here, this system basically still works, I can tweak it a little bit here and tweak it a little bit there, and we go maybe another term, we go another quarter, we go another year, let's discuss this another time. And this keeps compounding and compounding. So it's a legacy thing. Also in the US, I don't think there is a resistance. There is an inertial, comprehensible and completely understandable inertia that needs to be addressed in a different way.
That's terrific. Thank you. Let me ask you one last question. We just have a couple minutes left. But on the one hand, you've faced pressure from stockholders about short-term results. And on the other, you face pressure from NGOs because despite the commitment to renewables, you're still operating coal plants in Italy. And there's been pressure to close those plants more quickly. How do you balance these competing pressures as you lead the company?
I think the real cure, the real recipe here is to tell the truth. To tell the truth to both. You tell the truth to the investors saying, guys, next quarter, basically these companies 1 year after the other they're inertially pretty straightforward. If you start working at the cost base, and that takes in account the freedom of all the legacy assets that you have, because they also entail a lot of operating costs. You say, I'm going to work at the cost level and become more efficient, which, by the way, means disposing of some of the legacy, because that's a precondition to do it effectively, and investors love it. And then the second part is to tell the truth to the ONG, saying, guys, let's be honest here. We cannot shut off the lights and turn them on in 1 hour, getting rid of everything and getting everything new in 1 hour. There is a phase out, phase in phase, which we will, with transparency and clarity, explain, and you will monitor together with us over the years. I found out that this is a lot less difficult than expected. I mean, no one thinks that they can change the world overnight, but they want to know that this change has started and it can evolve and be tracked over the years. That's enough.
That's terrific. And I think everyone here can understand why we are in the midst of writing an HBS case on NL, which we'll be teaching in our course on creating shared value this fall, with the help of Banu Nadella and, of course, with Michael Porter's guidance. And really, it is extraordinary to have the chance to talk to you, Mr. Strachey. Thank you for making yourself available to us.
Thank you, Mark.
Remotely.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.